Is Karen crying?
She's laughing hysterically.
Okay, that was a record lunch. Crossed the ice, back over the ice, and had lunch. And I'm here.
Wow.
Very impressed.
Okay. I see the live on YouTube button in the corner, so I'm going to presume it's telling us the truth. And so I would say, let's get this committee of the whole meeting for February the 9th, 2021 started at 2:05 p.m. Any declarations of pecuniary interest, fellow councilors? I'm seeing none. So then, I got a nice small package for this one, but I have to find the right page. Be it resolved, moved by Councillor Yanko, seconded by Councillor Jarvis, be it resolved that the Committee of the Whole adopts the agenda of February 9, 2021 as circulated. All those in favor? And that is carried. Did we have any takers for our open forum, Madam Clerk?
We did not.
All right, so we can set that aside. And now we're talking about terms of reference for councils and the like. And Madam CAO, I
Thank
believe
you
that
very
is
much.
yours.
It is. So this was brought to council last month, and so we brought it back to committee of the whole for more discussion and suggestions. I'm not confident I'm going to walk away scot-free on this without anyone changing anything I've presented, based especially on Member Cooper's face. So the only thing that is different from what I proposed last time is that I suggested that based on the municipalities that I spoke to, that we have at least one councillor stay on all committees and no councillors on the Committee of Adjustment. And next time I'm going to take Member Hazelton's research, because he made a nice Excel table today to look at, and I did not do that for my report, so I'm sorry. He has more details than I do. I didn't speak to all of those municipalities, but I also spoke to some not on your list, but it did help.
Okay, so basically the idea is to reduce the number of councillors and a number of committees, and consequently discuss the terms of reference a little bit with them, at least in regards to membership.
Yes.
And so I think probably the best thing to do is open up the floor and let the comments circulate. And there's Mr. Cooper, willing to step up to the plate, number one, our lead batter.
So sorry to be so consistently at the beginning, but it's my passion. Anyway, I saw the stats from, or the information from our CAO and also from Councillor Hazelton. I just wanted to add, I didn't do as broad a survey, but I had a more direct contact with two of our neighbors, namely Muskoka Lakes and the Archipelago, to find out what they do. And I know some of that information's in the report, but I thought it was useful to relate just a bit of what I learned. And essentially, what I learned was that at the at Muskoka Lakes, they basically have one councillor who's a district councillor who is chair of the Committee of Adjustment for a variety of reasons. He said they used to have two or three, but for a variety of reasons, including people removing themselves because they may have had conflicts due to the business they're in. They're down to just the chap I was speaking with, Alan Edwards. But I thought it was important to know that they have, their council sits on basically a finance and admin committee, a planning committee, all of them do. They have also a parks and recreation committee, I guess it is. And they have 2 out of the 4 members of that committee are from council. So, you know, there's a fair bit of activity with the committees at our neighbors, Muskoka Lakes. I also spoke with Councillor Peter Frost, who is at the township of the Archipelago, where they have 11 councillors. And part of the reason for that is that the Archipelago is divided into two areas, north and south, Portobello in the north, Sans Souci in the south, and other associated communities. And interestingly, so they have a number of committees as well, including the Committee of Adjustment, Environment, Planning, and Public Works. Council sits on every one of those committees, except one councillor does not sit on the Committee of Adjustment because he's and this is not intended to be a slur or anything to our fellow councillors here, but he happens to be a contractor and felt he had conflicts and shouldn't sit on the Committee of Adjustment. So that is sort of the story I got from those two organizations. The Archipelago said that they've had this arrangement for quite a number of years. I think, probably they were formed about 40 years ago. I think a lot of the council activity and these committees has been going on for a long time. In fact, they basically have their committee of the whole on Thursday and then their council on Friday. And the reason I mention this is there's another thing we can learn from this. I asked about having the committee of the whole in advance of the council meeting. Were you able to sort of expedite matters fairly quickly because you had your cow before your council? And he said, not often, but or not all matters are going right directly to the council meeting the next day. But if there's something that's fairly urgent and doesn't require a great deal of sort of staff reporting, they take it to council the next day and they expedite on it. So I'm mentioning that as an additional sort of piece of knowledge for us that might help us deal with this sort of lag time we have between the committee of the whole and council, or we don't want committee of the whole. Their committees are, oh, by the way, and the committee of the whole is really, those committees are in the committee of the whole day. So that's how they conduct their committee of the whole. It's really the various committees that I already mentioned to you. I think with the exception of I'm not sure about the Committee of Adjustment, but the other committees are held on the Thursday. So that's the information I found. And I have to say that, as councillors in a more rural environment, we have our ears to the ground, and we have a lot of contact with our constituents. And I think it would be really unfortunate not to be involved on committees. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Councilor Rienko.
Well, looking at the recommendations that are in the report, I really can't support the idea of having one member on the Waste Committee and one on the Planning Committee. I don't think our community is split uniquely into two halves. You got the Bay and you got the inland, and that's been recognized by the district. That was the argument we used to have 3 councillors up at the district. And when it comes to putting one of the members, either the Bay or the inland, on the committee, I don't think the other half is going to be happy. I don't think you would want me on the committee, a waste committee only, and talking about marina issues, and same with the planning. There's unique planning issues in both the Bay and the inland. So it's either, to me, 0 or 2. That's the only option that I would go for on those. And I do think having councillors on committee does tend to direct the committees more away from just an idle chit chat, more to the point that needs to be resolved at a council meeting, because those councillors know what has to happen with any outcome of the committee. And so without direction at the committee level, some of these committees can get off topic. I'm still very supportive of the Planning Committee. And I think there should be 2 people on that, one from the Bay, one from the inland. The Waste Committee, I think we're getting to the point where the only issue that has to be resolved is the issue of waste at the marinas. And I don't know if we need a committee for that anymore. That could be brought in back into council and probably resolved a lot quicker, because I think we're spinning our wheels at the Waste Committee. And to me, that's a fairly important committee, and we're not meeting. So I think that could be brought into council. The other issue is that, we have, now that we've gone back to cow, there's not a lot of topics coming up on cow. Maybe we should put the waste issue in there as a cow issue and have cow more often talking about some of these issues instead of having separate committees. Because we're all elected to make decisions. And I think the cow should take more of the action on committees. Committee adjustments, yeah, 0 on that. I can see that's okay. But anyway, my comments were mostly on the planning and waste, and I think our cow can take some of that responsibility.
Thank you. Councillor Hazelton, I believe I saw your hand.
Thank you. I would like to just talk at a high level first. And given that we're in committee of the whole, I guess it's okay for me to have opinions that may not align with others. So I'm going to start off that way. I see at the very beginning in the report highlights that we have George Cuff offering comments. And what I heard or what I read to me didn't make any sense. So I figured, okay, let's go do some research and let's find out what else is being told to us. And so I went to the Municipal Councilor's Handbook written by MMAH, and they say that the statutory role of a municipal councilor is to represent the public and to consider the well-being and interests of the municipality. I thought, okay, represent the council, represent the public. I think that completely conflicts with what George is suggesting, that we're just liaisons, not advocates. And then I figured, okay, well, where else is this documented? So I went to the Municipal Act, and in section 224 of the Act, it starts talking about what the role of a councillor is. And it says, blah, 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 you were elected by your constituents to represent their views. Okay, that's interesting. And it also goes on to say that election to office requires you to have a broader understanding of the issues. Okay, so I'm reading all this stuff, and I'm reading this from the official published documents. Sadly, George wasn't part of the official public documents, but I'm getting all this material, which is what we are all given in learning how to be a good counselor, and it is telling me that I should be representing the views of my constituents, and that I should have a broader understanding of the issues, more likely better informed than the residents in my community. No, I'm not saying always better informed, because as Councillor Cooper has frequently pointed out, we have experts in our community that we need to draw on from time to time on a variety of matters. And so I think it's really important that we don't hang on what George said, when in fact we have these other documents that are quite opposite to what he is suggesting. Now, I would like to endorse what I heard from Councillor Wianco. What I'm going to paraphrase here is he's suggesting perhaps that we use Committee of the Whole for more discussion-oriented topics, perhaps collapse some committees into the Committee of the Whole. When I heard Councillor Cooper say that in the Township of the Archipelago, all councillors are on all committees, well, basically they have that structure where everybody's involved all the time. It started in my head to kind of gel that we have been elected by the community to represent the community, to become experts on these matters. We're essentially being paid to become experts in these matters. Why would we want to delegate that to somebody else unless they are well proven to bring expertise to the table? So I have to fundamentally and completely disagree with the assumptions that start off this report, that I think they are heading us down the wrong path. I absolutely endorse and embrace Councillor Wienko's comment about the idea of blending committees perhaps into committee of the whole. But what occurs to me as I have observed this council over the last 2 years is that we have very few opportunities for open discussion. Now, I'm going to recognize the mayor for a second, who often allows a lot more discussion than, say, the formal structure might require. Or
Darn right.
there we go. But I felt, well, I can't talk about what I just did, but I felt wonderful about the opportunity recently to have a fulsome discussion. And I think that a forum, a structured forum like Committee of the Whole, where we can bring these matters in, is really critical. Now let's talk about garbage or waste management just for a second. Waste management is a matter that is extremely important to all of us, not just one of us, not just two of us, all of us. And if we're going to be effective in this discussion, I think our job as councillors is to reach out to our constituents and bring their ideas forward, and perhaps as a committee of the whole, have that conversation, because it is too important to provide structured delays of committee, then committee of the whole, then council, to be able to move on topics like this. So I think that we have the beginnings of a change here. I like the idea of a beginning of a change. I want to absolutely make sure that we head in the right direction. We want to recognize, actually, there's one key comment I want to make. I have heard from many constituents recently. In fact, I got it in writing from one of our key constituents in the Honey Harbor Association, basically saying, Al, we elected you, go do your job. Now, that's kind of a blunt way of doing it, but I've heard councillors say, we've got an OP, we got a zoning bylaw, enforce it. I've heard all kinds of other comments about, hey, we've got a good framework, let's use it. Well, we also have a framework of meetings where we as councillors who are responsible to know what our constituents are thinking and feeling and bringing those ideas into council, for us to be clipped at the knees, I think is horrible. And I think that what we need, rather than being clipped at the knees, is more opportunities to discuss these important matters in an open forum like Committee of the Whole, so that we can build consensus and move forward in a timely manner on these things. Thank you.
CEO Gunby.
Thank you very much. I fully support the idea of maybe not having the committees, but having a different heading under COW for all those committee items. And if that is the feel of the group, then I think we would have to definitely switch conversation, as opposed to going through each committee and talking about the changes I made when it came to the amount of councillors on it. I would be fully supportive of not having any committees except for a committee of adjustment, and then having members of council do it all at committee of the whole.
But I think we have to listen to the rest of the council before we decide which direction this conversation. We'll see which direction this conversation goes, but I'm glad you're open to different possibilities.
It's my job.
Okay. All right. Councilor Bocheck.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. During my 2 terms on council, I've sat on a number of different committees, planning committee, policing committee, to mention a few, committee of adjustments. And my view of it is that the councillors that are appointed to these committees end up steering these committees in a direction that they want to go in. that they have an agenda. They are on those committees to reinforce their agendas. So we end up not getting a real true judgment of the things that are brought before these committees. Where if you have a total public committee, you bring 7, 8, 9, 10 different ideas to the table, and they all talk about it, and they all come with their with what they think is correct to council in every case, except for Committee of Adjustments, which they make their own decisions because they're quasi judicial type of deal. But anyways, for example, at the Planning Committee, I think if the Planning Committee, which their terms of reference state that they're supposed to discuss items that are brought to them by our planning department, and then make recommendations to council. Well, I kind of see it being redundant that there's 2 councillors sitting on a committee and they're bringing the rest of council the recommendations. In the case of the Planning Committee, they discuss everything, come to council with their ideas, and then council has the ultimate approval authority. So in all my times on committees, I've never seen a need outside of the Committee of Adjustments, which we really could relook at that too. I haven't really seen a need for a counselor to be there. Sure, it's nice to be there. It's nice to be able to eject your opinions. And most people look at you as a figure of authority and a person that knows something. So they tend to agree with you. And it's just a power that we have as counselors, that people trust that we have this carnal knowledge on all, what we don't. So I'm not a fan of having counselors on all the committees, and I think we could do without them. Thank you.
Are you saying do without counselors full stop, or on?
Well, since this is
counselors on the
Cal,
committee?
yeah. Since this is Cal, yes. No, just on the committees. I'm not a. I've been down the road. I've experienced it for 6.5 years. I've seen a lot of damage done to conversations because of councillor members being on those committees.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Councillor Douglas.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic for sure. Well, first of all, I just have to make one comment. We were not elected to be experts at anything. Knowledgeable, yes, but not experts. So that notion to go and sit on a committee because we're experts, I just think that's not, anyways, that's not what we were elected for. I think that, we brought back the Committee of the Whole. And in my opinion, I think it would be really great if we would do all the planning and the Waste Committee in there. I think the Waste Committee, the last time I sat in and watched one of those, you guys are spinning your wheels a little bit because you're down to a few issues. It does involve all of us, all of our, it's a very important, well, all of it's very important topics actually, so is the planning. And I think for that reason right there, the Waste and the Planning Committee, in my opinion, we could probably roll that into Committee of the Whole and have all the councillors involved with it, because then we're representing all of our constituents, all councillors. As far as the Committee of Adjustment goes, I think we would do just well, very well actually, to not have councillors sitting on that, because I'm a little bit in agreement with what Councillor Bochek says. You do sort of see things getting steered a little bit, and the Committee of Committee of Adjustment is a quasi judicial committee that should be independently thinking and looking at the documents in front of them, and not, they sort of bend a little bit, I found in the past, to listening to what a councillor is saying, thinking that the councillors might know a little bit more. I've saw a little bit of that going on when I was sitting on the Committee of Adjustment. So my opinion would really be that, Committee of the Whole, great place for all of us to be involved as councillors, to take care of the planning matters, and also the Waste Committee. And for the Committee of Adjustment, I think it'd be really great to have no councillors involved in that.
Thank you. Councillor Jarvis, you're the last of the 6.
I haven't sat on a lot of committees, so I don't have quite that background. But in my term on the Committee of Adjustment, and having talked to other members of the, another member of the Committee of Adjustment, I'll be careful with that. My impression is that in no way is a councillor, and or in this case, our mayor, on that committee steering it in any direction whatsoever. I think that on any committee, or even a council, a strong personality, whether they're a member of the public or whatever, will intend on driving the committee the way they want it to be driven, because that's the nature of their personality. So it wouldn't matter whether they're part of council or not. I think it's important that council has representation, certainly at the Committee of Adjustment. I can be swayed most ways on the other committees, but I think it's important to have that council tie in for cross communications, cross pollination, yada, yada, yada. It's also a learning process for us as councillors to see how these things work. Yes, we can look in on these committees, but being part of them, I think, really does help. I am not a keener on removing councillors from committee work, but specifically the Committee of Adjustment, where there are specific decisions being made that do pertain to the activities of the municipality. So I'm not too keen on this stuff as it currently stands.
Thank you. I would like to step in before we go into round two, and with some of my thoughts. And I appreciate all the research done on various communities around us, the various municipalities, and how they've structured various things. It's quite interesting to learn about that. But I'm trying to think of this from a open case of, well, let's do what we think is best for our township, regardless of what our neighbors are doing. And I'm afraid I'm not going to agree with everything I've heard, in part because not all of you are 100% in agreement with each other anyway. I think we have to start, if we have a blank slate, then we have to ask the question, what is the committee for? And I'm not talking about whether it's supposed to look into this or that or what have you. It's what is the purpose of the committee? Now, Committee of Adjustment is quite clear because it's more or less set by the province and it gets to decide on minor variances. But all the other committees, are we creating the committee to discuss a matter and to come up with recommendations? Or are we creating the committee to listen? And to me, that is an extremely important difference. I believe that if we have a committee where we want to hear more input from our residents, the fewer the councillors, the better, because many of us are guilty of talking too much and listening, and we can't help but, if it's not, I mean, grandstanding is too large a term, but we can't help but want to present our viewpoints because we know we have some constituents who are watching us and want to make sure certain viewpoints are expressed. Well, expressing viewpoints is not listening, and I think that is a key and vital factor. So, and I'll use one example that I don't have on the listing here, and that is the Honey Harbor Community Advisory Group. It does not have any council members on it. It has, I think it's 9 or something, I can't remember the exact number of residents. I know Councillor Hazelton and I have attended numerous of their meetings, but we are not on the committee. I think that has been very useful. I think it's been very useful in that we've heard what folks have to say. And that, to me, is the main purpose of that, is to get community input. I think the Waste Committee, and I will certainly shoulder part of the blame, I don't think we structured that properly from day one. We should have said that should be a committee of council, because we narrowed it down to only 3 councillors on that committee, even though we had a number of other councillors who were keen to be on it. We should have been smarter back then and just simply said, that's, whether you call it committee of the whole or you create another committee called Waste Committee, and it is 100% of our council, that's different than what, by having that Waste Committee with 3 councillors on it. I'm afraid the 3 of us as councillors spoke probably an equal amount as to everybody else who was in attendance. And to me, that what we didn't get is we didn't listen enough in a sense, because we talked too much. And so I believe, and I heard, what I believe was Councillor Yanko suggesting, maybe we don't need the Waste Committee anymore. I would happen to agree with that approach, because I think we also gave it too big a mandate. And different parts of our township have different needs and situations. And I think that would, I'll shoulder the blame, but I'm not sure that was a well-struck committee, if I can put it that way. I do like the idea of, and I don't care whether you call it council or committee of the whole, and if you prefer committee of the whole, I'm not fighting that definition. I think if we as council want to deliberate certain matters, committee of the whole is quite a suitable place to do it, especially if it's not 100% urgent. So I like the idea of, if we're going to strike committees to glean information from our constituents, in my mind, the fewer councillors, the better. And obviously the fewest would be a 0. If we're creating a committee to learn from, let's say, professionals or get input from people like that, then I say the more councillors, the better, because then they can hear what that person or those groups are trying to say, and that's maybe quite appropriate for committee of the whole. And so that's, to me, the distinction. As I say, committee of adjustment is a separate matter. It's a provincially mandated committee, and as such, I like the idea of 0. I like the idea of 0 because then, because I'm afraid, as Councillor Rienko pointed out quite fairly, is that our township is a township of different communities. And even though there's a lot of similarities, the challenges in 6 Mile Lake are different than the challenges in Cognachine. And what's happening in MacTier is different than what's happening in Oak Bay. We have different communities, and if we pick any one councillor, even though they know about issues township-wide, they can't help but reflect where they're coming from and where their constituents are who voted them in. So I'm inclined to agree with 0 on the Committee of Adjustment. And I think any other committees, I would say, if it's a committee to learn from the community, 0 councillors. If it's a committee to have us learn from experts or discuss among ourselves, then let's call it Committee of the Whole. And so that's my take on it based on what I've heard so far in my own reflections. And with that, shall we start round 2? Councillor Bochuk, I believe I saw your hand first, and I now see Councillor Rienko as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate my point that I was trying to make earlier, and that Mr. Jarvis had something to say about. And I want to give you an example that, let's see, who have we got here? Councillor Cooper and myself have 2 very different opinions on development and planning. While we both consider the environment to be the #1 concern, where, say, Councillor Cooper doesn't like oversized shed dormers, and I do, when, hypothetically, Peter, that at the Committee of Adjustment, the rest of the committee members listen to us. When we speak, they stop and they listen and they hear what we say. And they tend to agree with what we say because this is what we do for a living. We have surveyors, plumbers, farmers on that committee. They're not politicians, they're not councillors. So when we speak, they listen because they think we have a larger knowledge in the area or the expertise of planning or zoning or whatever. So what they're going to hear from me is completely different than what they're going to hear from Councillor Cooper. And they're going to sway that committee that way. If we're not there, they're independent of council. They have an independent process, an independent voice. And I think that's what democracy is all about. It's not being controlled or steered by one ideal or another. So just to reiterate what I said earlier, I don't think there's a need. I think there's a need for a strong chair on these committees, but not council members. I don't see a need for them.
I have Councillor Wanko followed by Councillor Cooper. Followed by Councillor
I think
Hayden.
I think a lot of us are in agreement. Let's go back to some of the roots on some of this stuff. The issue that keeps coming up is that we need to go to the public for information. We have experts out there. We have lawyers out there. We have planners out there. We have engineers out there that should be brought in and consulted on issues, and therefore we should form committees. When it comes to the planning committee, for example, we have professional planners out there, and they have been brought into the planning committee. And if you have listened to some of the planning committee sessions, you'll realize that the councillors don't do all that much talking. I don't do a lot of talking at the planning committee. I do a lot of listening. But boy, is there a lot of time spent by the other members talking about planning issues because they're experts. And even to have a developer on there or a contractor on there, I'm listening because that's a viewpoint you have to consider. So I have a lot of faith in the planning committee because they do spend a lot of time on the various small, I would call small issues. And I do a lot more listening because I'm not a professional planner and I want to hear from them. So I think the planning committee is something that could continue. It could be an advisory committee. And then I would agree that maybe there shouldn't be a counselor on that committee. So 0 there. That would be my recommendation. And maybe if you don't want to change the name to an advisory committee, but I think we should keep those planning experts together because that's a good mix and that committee is working well. The waste committee is a hodgepodge of people. There's no experts on waste management on the waste committee. And that's what the problem was. Again, if you listen to some of the sessions, the members of that committee have really nothing to say. They're not experts. They don't know what to say. So it ended up the councillors are doing all the talking because they kind of knew the direction they wanted to go. So the councillors did direct that, and I'm guilty of that. But the point is, we didn't get a lot of input from the individual members. So I would definitely get rid of the waste committee and bring back in the council because we are down to 1 or 2 issues. But, the planning committee should continue. In one of the sessions or one of the terms we had a financial committee, and we have financial experts out there. And that worked quite well. They did come together. And when you have a committee of experts, they do work. The committee of adjustments, they become specialists. So they work well. So when you have specialists, it works well. When you don't have specialists, you're kind of flubbing around. So that's what my opinion is. Committee of the adjustment 0, planning committee 0, but keep the planning committee and get rid of the waste committee.
Thank you. So we have Councillor Cooper, Councillor Hazelden, and I see Councillor Douglas's hand up, and now I see Councillor Jarvis. So now we have the order. Councillor Cooper.
Well, thank you very much, Mayor Kritzier. And some of what Councillor Wianco has just said, I'm not disagreeing with. I think we do have a good planning committee. I'm not thinking that we need to have all councillors off it, but I think we have members of that committee that are experts. We do have a very good chair, which has helped. Our terms of reference for most of our committees are very light, and that's where part of the problem is. But I think that planning committee also works because of the experts who are there, and we have people that aren't shrinking violets. And frankly, we don't need shrinking violets on many of our committees. We need to hear from people and for people to speak their minds. And if they have reticence to do that, I say that's unfortunate. Let's find some people that can speak their mind. So that's the planning committee. The committee of adjustment, I'd be disappointed to see all of the councillors off that committee. And while I would certainly support having members of the public on that committee. I have been involved with the Committee of Adjustment and especially the selection process. And I have to tell you that most disappointing aspect of selecting candidates was that there were certain members of the selection committee that had no interest in having experts, in other words, planners, on our Committee of Adjustment, and that was not good. So if there's any area besides our planning committee where we could use some expertise, aside from just our staff, would be from people that understand the planning world, the legal side of it, and the planning, which are very different aspects of that. So we could go to our community and get people, but we chose not to select them. So that concerns me. I think we do need better terms of reference. If we're going to have committees, I think we need to maybe do some research at other townships and see what the terms of reference are. The Committee of Adjustment has terms of reference and a lot of procedures that are followed over a long period of time, so it works reasonably well. But most of our other committees don't have that kind of frame of reference, and it's not, I'm not criticizing staff or anybody on this, it's much our council, but I'm criticizing myself. So I think we need terms of reference if we're having committees. I also would support having things like with the waste issue coming back to the Committee of the Whole, but in a formal way. In other words, not just throwing it at the Committee of the Whole. I think in the Committee of the Whole, we could have certain committee work that's very specific to a matter. In other words, maybe it's finance, and that's the finance report, and this is the waste management report, so that we're not just it's not ad hoc. I think it needs to be a formalized approach. Otherwise, we're just sort of throwing out the idea that committees can't work, and I think it can work, but within the framework of the Committee of the Whole. I also very much like learning from our neighbors occasionally, including the fact that it might make some sense to consider when we have the Committee of the Whole so that we can act quickly when we have to. In other words, switching the order from council to Committee of the Whole to the other way around. So there's another thing I would like us to think about. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Hazelton.
Thank you very much. I wanted to pick up on a few threads here that I've heard from people. And I want to frame the concepts of committees into three different categories. One, a need for listening. Two, a need for representing. And three, a need for adjudicating. And going backwards, adjudicating, that's Committee of Adjustment. That's an environment where people have to make decisions and basically be adjudicators on applications that come forward. I think what's critical, personally, I don't have a lot of positive desires to either personally be on a Committee of Adjustment or to have councillors on the Committee of Adjustment. What I do care about is that those people who are on the Committee of Adjustment have skills, are prepared to speak up, and have the proper training. And if those criteria can be met, then I'm okay with not having a counselor on there. But I think it's probably a good environment to reinforce matters of the township and keep us connected with things that are going on outside of the other councillor things that we do. So I think that's useful. So I would be in favor of keeping a couple of councillors in a Committee of Adjustment. We talked about representing our community. And when I think about the Waste Management Committee, I think one of the reasons it failed was because the people that were attending the Waste Management Committee were not privy to all the other conversations that councillors had already had. And we essentially were waiting for them to get up to speed before they could really offer any opinions. And the opinions that they might offer, I think we as councillors could probably get from conversations with our constituents. And so I'm not really sure that constituent participation is all that important. So I would strongly support the idea of committee of a whole handling waste management like matters. The first thing that I mentioned here, the first category, listening, and I'm glad that Mayor Coetzee, you talked about the need for listening. And I think it's, if we look at the kinds of committees that would be useful, the listening is where we listen to people with demonstrated expertise. And certainly in the world of planning, as Councillor Wienko has said, there are a lot of people out there that have demonstrated expertise in planning and in planning law. And I think we have an opportunity to learn from them by listening. And so a forum that enables that and enables discussion with council, so that we're not simply just listening, but we're engaging in dialogue with them, so that we can not only listen, but we can learn. And we don't learn purely by listening. We learn more by engaging, asking questions, etc. So some forum like that, to me, that could be a committee, or maybe there's a way you could structure a committee of the whole to accommodate that. But this whole concept of listening, whether it be a planning matter, whether it be environmental matter, it really doesn't matter to me. It's providing a forum, a structure that allows us to listen and then engage in dialogue. And again, that's kind of what I thought committees were all about. But if there's some way that we can facilitate that in committee of the whole with extended delegations or deputations or whatever, so it's not a 10-minute window, but in fact it's an opportunity for significant dialogue and discussion and listening, then great. But if we can't do that in committee of the whole, then bang, back to committee structure, because that's the only other structure that I'm aware of where we can do all of that listening, dialogue, and learning all at the same time. And I will pile on with Councillor Cooper's comment. Terms of reference, they are absolutely critical. They're critical for committees. They're critical when we are asking third parties to do work for us. Tossing a matter over the wall without terms of reference, clear and effective terms of reference, is a fail. Tossing a matter into planning committee, for example, without effective terms of reference is a fail as well. So those are my comments at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Douglas.
Thank you. It's interesting to hear everybody's take on this. I would agree that the planning committee is probably a really valuable committee, but I do feel that we shouldn't have councillors on it. I think that is one committee that a lot can be learned, and maybe they can bring their, and do a delegation. I mean, work it out so it comes into committee of the whole at some point, or their report comes back to us, or in some way. But I think that probably is a good committee, because it's a good mix of skilled people, whether it be planners, contractors, whatever. But I really don't think that we should have any councillors on that one. I still feel that the committee of adjustment, maybe we need to look at how we bring people in. I quite honestly, on one hand, understand what Councillor Hazelton is saying and Councillor Cooper is saying in regard to having some skilled people in there, maybe planners and so on. But that really becomes quite difficult, because planners have their own way of thinking. All of them do. It's very interpretive in some ways. And I think the committee of adjustment really should get down to, having people who are representing the community, from the public, that have common sense, that get a good understanding of what the four tests are. And I think we have some very good people on our committee that have been on the committee of adjustment for quite some time that understand that. As far as the waste committee, it sounds like we all sort of agree to that. I think it's an important issue for all of us as councillors to speak about. And I think we're at that point where we could put it into, whether it's committee of the whole or council, but I guess committee of the whole. So I would like to I still feel, after even listening to everybody, that we should go the route of putting the planning committee into, leaving the planning committee as it is without councillors. I think it's valuable. And committee of adjustment, no councillors, and bring the waste committee into committee of the whole. And yes, maybe look at our term of reference. I agree with that. I mean, maybe that does need to be looked at if we're going to restructure.
All right, Councillor Jarvis, once again, you're last in the round of comments.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Pick up on a few threads here again. This sort of cult of personality being a driving force on committee drives me crazy. Everybody who is here and everybody that'd be on any other committee, any committee work, the people that are there all have their own agenda. That's why they're there. That's why they've joined the committee. It's nice when those people with an agenda also have the ability to listen. We cannot, when we're choosing committee members or when other people are choosing committee, cannot necessarily guarantee that the people we're choosing for committee are going to be good at listening. It'd be nice to think that we're all very good listeners, and maybe a lot of us can say, oh yeah, we're great listeners, but you know what? Everything we do and say and all the decisions we make always have an influence from somewhere, and usually it's from where we've come from. I don't see a disadvantage to any committee having somebody from council on it. I don't see councillors, I can't believe that we could be perceived as being significantly better informed or better educated with respect to whatever the committee's work is than anybody else in that committee. I would like to give you the example of, say, a committee of adjustment that was all contractors. Where would that drive things in the committee of adjustment, or just the opposite, if that was the case? A good mix on any committee provides a great variation in opinion, and then you come to a consensus as a committee. That's your job. That's the idea. Again, I don't see where being a member of council affects that in one way or the other. I do feel that somebody from council being on committee provides great cross communication between council and the committee work. So the word gets back and forth, and it gets back a little bit more cleanly. Yeah, there are committee reports. There are resolutions and stuff that come before council to be decided on ultimately, and information wise, but to be informed or better informed because you're on council, I think carries a lot of weight in that regard. Not because you can be a powerhouse or a bully on the committee you're serving. I think that's crazy. I agree with the few councillors have talked about terms of reference. Maybe having a tighter terms of reference would help. Again, my example, the only example I have other than the library board is the committee of adjustment, and everybody's opinion has been listened to. I think the committee of adjustment has been working very well. I cannot believe for a moment that my opinion carries any more sway on that committee than anybody else's. I wouldn't want to think that. Heck, if it's something to do with a friend of mine's place, maybe, but otherwise, no. I think that, yeah, there are a lot of personalities in this world. I'm no psychiatrist, psychologist. I have a cousin who is. Maybe I could bring him in. But I think that the various opinions that come to committee work, whether it's representative from council or from the public, it's all the same thing. In the end, everybody's got to listen and come to a decision. That's the purpose of what the committees are there for. I think I've said enough.
All right, thank you. I think one thing that we haven't discussed, and it's probably slightly outside this mandate, but I think we have to be a little bit clear on, is that when we're talking committees, we're talking about basically formal structures. That means that we need to have staff there and the minutes taken and all that. And I think we have to understand that versus informal structures where you could just put together a group of people and they can chat away and take, and you whether or not you take notes. And I think that's also part of what we have to understand here is that when we're talking about these committees, we're talking about a formal structured situation. But I'm going to disagree a little bit with you, Councillor Jarvis, in the sense that I do believe some personalities, whether they're council members or members of the public, are such that they, just by call it force of personality, tend to steer the committee, whatever committee it is, a little bit more than some of the other folks, which is unfortunate. And unless you happen to be that person doing the steering, because then you getting closer to what you want as opposed to what everybody else wants. So I think it all depends on the personalities of the individuals. I'm going to ask our CAO if she wants to jump in with a few more comments at this point until we, and then after that, round 3, if we can start narrowing it down a little bit to what we do, where we agree or disagree.
Perfect, thank you. So what the notes I've taken so far, I don't have Member Bocek's thoughts written down. Maybe the clerk does. So across the board, no waste management committee, put that topic on committee of the whole.
Okay.
I think everyone was okay with that. So it seems to be a tie so far on having council on planning committee and council on committee of adjustment. So those two we need to figure out. What I'm also hearing that, so planning committee will remain as planning committee. We will not be getting rid of it and putting it under cow, if I'm picking that up correctly.
Yes.
And I just, okay. And then I just wanted to
a lot of
also,
heads nod.
I also wanted to verify that it's almost like a double-edged sword. It's a lot easier for staff the less committees we have, because it takes up so much staff time. And if, on the other hand, if we don't have the committees, members of the public may feel like we're purposely not including them in any sort of decision making. And in Georgian Bay, it's everyone wants to be involved and they want to be able to, say their thoughts and express their opinions. So we can also definitely look at the procedural bylaw, which is the reason it's not here today, because we weren't sure what would have to change with it. We can change that to reflect that cow will result in, you can have maybe 2 delegations per item or something like that. Might be a lot, but we can definitely work on that to make cow a little more flexible. And so members of the public are still able to sort of be involved in the conversations.
Okay. All right. So what I'm hearing is that we're all agreeing that we're not, waste committee is now going to be absorbed, if I can put it that way, by the committee of the whole. And it seems like everybody's in favor of continuing planning committee. So the debate is whether or not a councillor should be part of the planning committee. And committee of adjustment, are we down to 1 or 0? So if those 2 committees are continuing, and then let's talk this round about on those 2 committees, how many councillors should be in attendance. Now, this time I saw Councillor Jarvis's hand first, which is quite a difference from the rest. Oh, Councillor Hazelton has 2 hands. Councillor Wienko has 2 hands. I'm going to go Jarvis, Hazelton, Wienko.
Actually, can I just poke in? I want to ask our CAO a question it's about something she was saying, but without, I'm not going to comment on this matter, but I want to ask, in my research of all these other townships, I discovered that there are massive numbers of committees that all these other townships have, and we don't. And I'm wondering, what do they do differently to be able to provide the staff services for all of those committees when you tell us that you don't have staff time to provide the staff for all of these committees? I'm just confused about that environment, so please help me.
I can't comment on the amount of staff other people have or the amount of work that goes into it, but our procedural bylaw currently says, we have to have the agenda published on this day. We have to have things ready on this day. Then we have staff that have to take the minutes and then, the resolutions, and 4 minutes after the meeting ends, people are emailing, asking for the resolutions and the minutes. And it might sound a little minutia coming from an office administrator, but it's a huge pain.
So I wonder, and I'm going to let Clerk weigh in on this. I have to be careful how you spell that word "way." But I wonder if different people define committees differently. Clerk Way.
Many municipalities have a committee coordinator, and that's their entire job. So you would have a clerk, a deputy clerk, and at least a committee coordinator and some kind of EA. So literally a full-time job dedicated to just managing committees. We don't have that position. And so all of that work, if we were to have 10 plus committees, would somehow have to be absorbed into the tasks that we already have. And reasonably, there is not enough hours in the day for us to manage that. So if you want 15 more committees, then we need more staff. It is, I think, kind of what it boils down to. But that's not really today's discussion. But that's
Okay.
that's how many manage it.
Yeah. All right, so at this point, I had Councillor Jarvis, followed by Councillor Hazelton, followed by Councillor Wienko, and then we'll go to the other three after. Okay, Councillor Cooper's keen.
Quickly, just for clarification on my part, the Honey Harbor CAG is an advisory committee, so that's outside this realm, correct?
It's included in the terms of reference
Okay.
as it is still a committee, but there's no members of council on it, so we're not referring to that committee today.
Oh, that's why. Okay, fine. Fine. That was one big question. I'm still not convinced that actually, the mayor illustrated it perfectly. If somebody is a strong enough personality, it doesn't matter whether they're a member of council or a member of committee or whatever, they're going to drive it. I think that it's beholden on those that are choosing committee members and looking at people that have applied for committee positions to try and determine who will be best to fit on a committee, to work together to come to decisions or recommendations that work for the committee. And having one person that drives the whole thing obviously is detrimental to the whole the whole concept. But it's inevitable that there are people out there that are going to try and do that. And how do you avoid that? I mean, it's just that's human nature. So I still have a problem with that. I think I can understand the concept of not having of getting by with a good group of people that understand planning on a planning committee, and the council doesn't necessarily have to be representative there. But I'm going to still stand my ground on for committee of adjustment. I still think from the standpoint of the fact that the committee of adjustment is making for some people very critical decisions. I think it's important that we have somebody from council on that committee, one or two. I'm neither here nor there on that, but I think the representation should be there. Thank you.
So you're 0 on planning committee and at least 1 on committee of adjustment. Okay. I'm keeping little notes here for my own sake. Councillor Hazelton.
I wanted to echo Councillor Jarvis's comments about this intimidation or whatever or lack thereof from a councillor member, and I want to do it by way of example. We have a Honey Harbor CAG. We have no councillors on that. But what was interesting for me to observe is that it took probably 3 meetings, maybe 4, before the members finally decided it was time, they had enough, they wanted to start speaking up. And they all felt intimidated at the beginning, and it wasn't from a councillor. And it wasn't from the mayor, because it was Mayor Coetzee and I who were sitting and observing but not participating. So I think, personally, I think we need to take that concern off the table. And as Councillor Cooper has said, if they're not prepared to participate, act, and speak up, then they're probably not the right profile. Having said that, I'm good with waste management in a committee of the whole. I believe that as basically echoing what Councillor Wienko said, which is we really are known as having a split township. So having one councillor is a fail. So I think the concept of having 2 councillors on the planning committee or none, my preference would be 2. And similar on committee of adjustment, I think that again, 1 is a fail, and that I think 2 is a good balanced approach. And we probably need to talk about some other committees, but I'll stop there.
Thank you. Councillor Wienko.
Interesting. Yeah, talking about personalities, I've been around long enough on council that we had a couple of councillors. One of them was a lawyer at one time, and everybody listened to him. And quite often he was able to sway a lot of the council. And then during budget time, we had a chartered accountant when it came to budget, it was great. It was great because we listened to him, and quite often that resolved a lot of issues. So having experts on these committees can be helpful. The good thing about the planning committee is that there's several experts on that committee, and there is good debate among these experts. And I would be reluctant to bring the planning committee into council because I don't want to talk about domers for an hour or two, or the shape of a dock half a day. You know, some of the topics that they talk about get really deep, but boy, are they boring. So I don't think we want to bring them to council. So I would like the planning committee to continue. I'm okay with 0 or 2, but not 1. So you can decide. I'm either good for 0 or 2. I enjoy being on it. So if I had to pick one, I would say the 2. On Committee of Adjustments, I think Councillor Cooper and I have a different opinion on this. I think the idea of the Committee of Adjustment was to bring in lay people with common sense, not professionals, because I think professionals on the Committee of Adjustment does can sway the committee into one direction or another. But when we have common sense individuals, quite often they do work through the issues and come up with a common goal. So I'm more leaning towards 0 for Committee of Adjustment.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Mayor Kutzier, and I'm going to continue on with the theme that I think terms of reference are going to really help us if we go down that road. I also think that we don't need to reinvent the wheel when it comes to terms of reference. We just need to consult with other municipalities that seem to work effectively and learn from them. I also would challenge the issue of hiring somebody to manage this. I think what we need to do is to look at all the work that we're doing and figure out what is taking up a lot of time that may be not productive. In other words, a few years ago, we had a core services review, and the core services review helped us identify areas where we need to make change. We didn't make the change, by the way, because we didn't have the chutzpah to do something about it. But I think it's important to make sure that this isn't a criticism of our CAO. We have certain things we've been doing for a long time, but I'm wondering if there are things that we can stop doing to allow us to have the horsepower, the manpower to accomplish things. And so I would suggest to you, given that we're a municipality of not that much greater a population than 15 or so years ago, when we had a staff of half the size, and I realize there's government regulations that have changed and blah, 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 but I just think we need to sort of sit back also, not just on our committee issue, but more generally, in order to support this committee work, to understand what we are doing or not doing in that regard. As far as the specifics that you're asking for, Peter, I think that I'm sort of falling along the lines that the planning committee is working well for us. I'd prefer to see councillors involved with that. We have some strong characters on the committee and a very strong chair. So I don't see that as a problem. The Committee of Adjustment, I'm afraid I am of the view, not afraid, I am of the view that it really doesn't hurt having a couple of councillors on there and an expert or two. And then one of the problems that I see is that with respect to having experts or not, one thing that we forget about the Committee of Adjustment is that it's a bit like being in court with a jury, but no judge, and only really the prosecution, but not the defense. And I think that, so the prosecution is our planning department, just for argument's sake. And so I think it can be a little bit unbalanced. So I would like to see some counselors on that committee. So that's where I stand on committees.
So you're saying,
oh, by the way, in bringing the into COW, the waste management, I support that completely.
so you're saying 2 counselors on planning and 2 counselors on the Committee of Adjustment? You were muted, so I just took that as a headed nod.
And waste coming into,
Yeah.
sorry, to
Okay.
committee, committee of the whole. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Councillor Douglas, Councillor Bocheck, who wants to go first? Councillor Bocheck, followed by Councillor Douglas.
So great having Cal back because we get to talk freely and hear everyone's opinions. Going back to Councillor Jarvis's point.
Councillor Bocheck, I'm taking that personally. I believe we can hear everyone's opinions in regular council as well. I agree.
Well, I think the rules are a little simpler here, so we can.
Okay.
I've even heard swearing, for God's sakes. Wow. So anyways, back to Mr. Jarvis's point, where it is incumbent upon us to pick these committees correctly and put people on these committees that have value to the committee. So I personally think we did a great job in this term of council picking the planning committee. We've got people from all walks of life, very professional and balanced. And I think that committee's terms of reference brings council a good recommendation. So I personally think that committee can run without any council members on it. So you can strike that one down. Secondly, bringing the waste management committee into COW. Yes, let's do that for sure. There's not enough there to have a committee for. And committee of adjustments. I was of 2 schools of thoughts before today's meeting. And I thought, my first school of thought was, well, what if on planning committee days, we heard the minor variances first, and then we went to the zoning amendment second. In other words, we would have this council as hearing the minor ones first and then hearing the major ones secondly. So food for thought there, I guess. Being that we're not going to pursue that and move in that direction, then I would just like to see the committee of adjustments be reviewed, the members be reviewed, and run it without council. So there's your answer for that. And not put them in for a 4-year term, if that's what they're in for. I believe they are. But have the ability to recruit people that may have had a change in their life and they are available now to sit on that committee of adjustments that may serve the committee better. So agreeing with Councillor Jarvis, it's incumbent upon us to choose the right people for these committees. And if we do that correctly, then I don't feel we need councillor representation unless it's all of council.
Thank you. Councillor Douglas.
Again, great thoughts coming from everybody on this, and I agree with a number of things that have been said, and of course don't agree with some other things, but I think it gets down to, I haven't really changed my position on this, but Councillor Bocheck brings up something interesting, and that is with the committee of adjustment, and I'll start going on the other direction here. I truly believe that we can do very well with bringing common sense, good people from the community, picking the committee well. I don't think we should have planners on that, honestly. Well, in one sense, I think it's great because they can interpret things, but we have planners that can interpret things in the council. Putting another planner in there or somebody who's got that kind of background, really, you're just going to have 2 planners possibly pitting against each other because it is interpretive in some ways. There are many, we've had many people on that committee of adjustments that they probably know better than most of the planners that are, because they've been on there for such a long time and they know how to handle themselves and they know how to make good common sense decisions. They understand what the 4 tests are. And I think we should leave that in the hands of our community and pick the committees well. The planning committee, I feel quite strongly we should leave that together. It sounds like it's a really good mix of people with lots of strong personalities and lots of a diversity of skill sets, which I think is nothing but a total advantage for us. I don't think we need counselors on that. To Councillor Wianko's point. You know, he doesn't know anything about the docks and I just don't think it's necessary to have counselors on there. The waste committee. Yeah, I think that should come into back into council or into committee of the whole. But going back to the what Councillor Bochek was saying with the committee of adjustment, I would agree with him. We either have no counselors at all or bring it into council or on a council day or cow day and make it all counselors. But I still think it's better to have the community doing it, to be honest with you. So I would say
All right. Thank you. You know, it's very interesting when I look at this, because at this point, between the 6 of you on the planning, I mean, we're all agreeing, we're all in agreement on the waste committee, it seemed, before we started this, but that's fine. On the planning committee, we all are in agreement it should exist. And 3 of you prefer 2 members, and 3 of you prefer 0. I personally prefer 0, but you know, if we add it all up, we average out to 1. I don't know if that's the right compromise, but it's interesting how we do have a split here, that 3 of you think there should be 2 and 3 of you think it should be 0, even though
I'll go 0 and skew. I'll go 0 and skew the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, and Councilor Hazelton, I think, said it's got to be 2 or 0, but not 1. So obviously the average of 1, I don't think is going to carry too much weight. On the committee of adjustment, we had 1 say 2 or 0, 1 say 2, 3 say 0, and 1 said 1 plus. So whether that's 1 or 2. So again, we're pretty well split here, and it allowed me for rounding a little bit here with perhaps 3 of you favoring 2 and 3 of you favoring 0. I'm not sure how far this little survey has got us on this whole thing, but I think it's interesting that now that Councilor Wienko has leaned towards 0 on planning committee, that's if we call the vote, the number would end up being 0. On the committee of adjustment, if we call the vote, and I had the deciding vote, we'd end up with 0. And I'm not saying that's what we're doing yet, because I don't think this discussion's over yet, because apparently this is cow and we can talk things out. But I just wanted to mention that that's sort of where we're going, having crunched through the numbers. And I think it's very interesting listening to you, because one thing I heard numerous times from many of you is we got to pick the members well. Now we're somewhat stuck with who offers to do the job. We've got to pick the members well, and a strong chair makes for a better committee, regardless of what committee it is. And sometimes that goes by chance, because we don't know how strong a chair will be until they've been in the seat for a little while. So, interestingly enough, I know that in the original recommendations that we received, we had planning committee with 1 counselor and committee of adjustment with 0 counselors. That was the original recommendation. Well, I don't know how you even call them recommendations, discussion points that CAO Gunby put out, because she didn't think that we would just blindly accept and move on, which is good. I think it's good discussion. So I'm going to say to all of you right now, do we want to call a vote on each of these matters, or do you want to have one more piece of input? And I see Councillor Hazelton is already going to express an opinion, followed by Councillor Wienko.
So I'm intrigued with the conversations that we've been having. I guess I'm disappointed that we aren't reaching out to our neighboring communities of similar size and structure, and trying to understand why they have done what they have done, which is far more council participation. As we've learned, the archipelago, all councillors and committee of adjustment, all councillors are in planning, and you can get down through the list of stats that I produced. And I think based on what I'm hearing, we should be seeking input from these other townships to find out why they've had so many people from council participate in these committees. Because I'm not sure that we have brought any new insights to the table today, other than a few stats. And I guess I'm concerned that we're going to make decisions without really going through a learning opportunity. And I know our mayor talked about the need and the importance of learning, but having a discussion without bringing in this external set of references and helping us understand why these other communities of common nature to ours have done things dramatically different than what we may be going to be doing here, I think, personally, I think would be a big mistake.
Thank you. Councillor Rienko, followed by Councillor Cooper, followed by Councillor Jarvis.
Well, I say if we had as you indicated, if we had a vote on the planning committee, it would be 0. And I have no problem with that, because basically they come back to council with a recommendation. And if any councillor who is following a particular issue at the planning committee, if a particular councillor objects, we can debate the whole thing over again. If you want a dome of this size and council decides a different size, council will rule the day. So I think council is not giving up any ground to having 0 on the planning committee. On the committee of adjustments, I'm happy to saw off at 1 person. Based on our conversation earlier today, I think we're all like-minded now as councillors of where we want planning to go. So I think having 1 individual, 1 councillor, if you want to saw it off, you say you got 50-50, I'll saw it off at 1. It would be nice if the mayor would be that individual, because he does represent both the bay and the inland. So that would be, my preference for the individual that would be on that committee. But failing that, I would be comfortable having 1 councillor on the committee of adjustment.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper, followed by Councillor Jarvis.
Thank you, Mayor Kutzier. And I'd just like to say a couple of things. One is that I'm along the lines of what Councillor Hazelton is saying. I'm not sure that today is the day to be dealing with all of these committees. I think we're in agreement on 1, and I'd like to see that move forward. We're falling behind on the issue of waste management, so I'd strongly encourage that we deal with that one. The others, I really would like to see us find out how it's working elsewhere. I'd like to see how they manage all these committees also. It just, there's an opportunity for us. And so, a phone call to the CAO of the archipelago, a phone call to the CAO of Muskoka Lakes might give us some insight if we, ask a number of questions to see what's going on. And so that would be my recommendation for the other 2 committees, that we get some information to us so that we can maybe deal with it with a little more knowledge. Finally, I would like to, sorry?
I would say the good news is, because this is committee of the whole, we can't make a final decision.
Well, yes, there's that too. But anyway, that's a technical, well, we can vote on it as you were suggesting. And I'm suggesting perhaps on the 2 that we're still looking for information, that we should get that information before we stick our line in or draw our line in the sand. That's really what I'm saying, Mayor Kutzier. The final thing I'd like to remind us all is that we have 1 committee that we all agree is working very well. And that's our planning committee and our committee of adjustment, which has more sort of terms of reference. But our planning committee, I'd just like to tell you all that, and this is not to blow my horn, but the reason we have a strong chair and the reason that we have some good committee members was somebody in the background was doing a hell of a lot of recruiting. I won't mention who that person was, except he's speaking to you right now. So I just think we need to remember that people don't just arrive in positions from the sky. We have to work at it. And it's not just putting out an RFP and saying who's going to apply. You have to go out into the market and find, and I say the market, our markets are constituents, and see if we can find people that can fill the role in a very competent way. And that's what happened with the planning committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Jarvis.
I have been listening quite intently to all the input here. A couple of things come up. One is the thoughts expressed by Councillors Hazelton and Cooper regarding what other communities of similar size and population type are doing, and I think that would be well worth our while to do, get that input. The other one is the term common sense that came up. I think we've got to be very, very careful about using that term too often, because it seems to me that one person's common sense tends to be significantly different than somebody else's. And it just not, I don't think it applies in the same way it used to as a term, any term of reference. So I would be, finally, the Councillor Hazelton's comment about, and Wianco's thoughts about having one or two people on committees from council, if we have anybody. I guess there is and should be some concern about the thinking of us versus them, inland versus coastal, in committee structure if we have council representation. So the two makes more sense in that context. So I'd be, if we're going to have council representation on committee, I think two would be better than one, for that very reason. But I think it'd be beholden on us to go out and find out what the other communities are doing in this context for those committees.
All right, thank you. Councillor Douglas.
Yeah, I guess there's a learning opportunity to be had in anything that we look into, but I think we should also keep in mind that, every township is very different, and the township of Georgian Bay is very different. We may have some similarities, but what's working for them may not work for us. To find out why it's working for them might be interesting, but I think that, quite honestly, we don't need to be followers. We need to be leaders. We need to make our own decisions based on what our township needs and what we feel is the right way to go. And I think if our CAO didn't think this would work or this would be an advantage for us, she wouldn't bring it to us, first of all. That's just wanted to put that out. Thank you, Jessica, for putting the time into this. As far as the Committee of Adjustment goes, I still think that we need to have, my point hasn't changed. I'm not going to repeat it because everybody knows where I stand on that. If it was to go down the track of having anyone on there, I would say that I think it should be our mayor, who represents both sides. I really feel quite strongly that we should not have councillors on there, not one representing the inland, outland. I just think it's too easy for people to be directed and too many strong personalities. And that is not that's not a slight against any of us. We all have different opinions. We all are very strong personalities in our own ways. So I'm not, trying to pick on one person over the other. I too have a very strong personality, and inadvertently, I think we do sway other people's decisions being councillors. And so it's not because I think that some of us are better than others. It's because I think all of us, just by virtue of who we are, our personalities being strong, and the fact that we're councillors do have an effect on other people. So I haven't really changed my decision on how I feel about that. If we were going to go the one councillor, I would say I would maybe think about that if it was our mayor. Otherwise, I still think we should go with 0 and have a strong chair. As far as the rest goes, I still feel the planning committee is working well. We don't need councillors on it, and I think we should just pull that part. And Ways Committee haven't changed. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Councillor Wojcik, you want to go into this round? You're the last one.
No, I think I was pretty clear. If we're not going to have all of council on the Committee of Adjustments, then we have none. I think the planning committee is a great, strong committee that doesn't need council input. So I stand pat on my original statements.
Yeah, I will, to me, I can certainly understand the all or nothing approach. My concern with the all, if we had the planning committee and all councillors on it, I think that would be awkward, far too cumbersome. I can tell you that my intention for the rest of this term, as it has been up until this date, is to attend every committee meeting that I can, regardless of how many councillors are on it or its makeup, because I just find that the committee meetings can be very informative. Not always, positive, but there's a lot of input that you can receive from attending committee meetings, even when you're in the background. I'm trying. Okay, I'm stuttering, I admit it. Because we have a couple of choices here. We can either just take a vote and to make a recommendation to council, or we can just simply not vote yet and let our staff come up with a little more information that has been requested, and then next month consider it at council based on all the conversations we've had here, plus any additional input that comes in between now and then. I don't know if that's copying out, because it is. Okay, Ms. Gumby.
Well, Mr. Mayor, in the committee of the whole, could we not poll the members? I've heard a lot from the inland and the coastal areas that seems like everybody seems to be fine with a council member on the committee of adjustments as long as it's you. So can we take a poll of the councilor members that would vote for one if you were the one?
I see our clerk putting her hand up.
I was just going to state that voting on this as 3 separate items is also an option instead of addressing all of them at once. I would hate for everything to be impacted because there isn't an agreement on one item. So I'm just throwing that idea out there as well.
Okay, so the 3 items, one would be Waste Committee, the second would be Planning Committee, and the third would be Committee of Adjustment. So why don't I try that? And I'm going to say move by Councillor Wienko, seconded by Councillor Cooper, that the Waste Committee be disbanded or folded into the Committee of the Whole. Is that wording adequate for our clerk?
Effective immediately?
Well, no, because council has to approve this at the next council meeting.
Right.
We're making a recommendation to council.
Recommendation to council.
Yeah. So be it resolved that the Committee of the Whole recommend to council that the Waste Committee be dissolved and the responsibility handed to the Committee of the Whole. I had it worded better last time, didn't I?
You can just say that the committee is disbanded and absorbed by Committee of the Whole.
Thank you. That's the word I missed. Clerk, where are you putting this in print before I call the vote? Okay, thank you. Oh. It looks like the reaction from one councilor. We better end this meeting soon. Okay, moved by Councilor Wienko, seconded by Councilor Cooper. Be it resolved that the Committee of the Whole recommend to council to dissolve the waste management. Oh, we already dissolved it. Let's like that. Be it resolved that the Committee of the Whole recommend to council to dissolve the Waste Management Committee and absorb into the Committee of the Whole. All those in favor? Okay, I got 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, that's better. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, that is unanimous. I don't know if we're going to achieve this in the next two, but we're going to try. Let's see where we go. Okay. Moved by Councillor Hazelton, seconded by Councillor Bocheck. Be it resolved that the Committee of the Whole recommend to Council that the Planning Committee have no councillors appointed in the future. To direct staff.
Can I have a question before you vote?
Oh, yeah, no, once we have the resolution, then we can have a discussion on the specific resolution before we vote. Be it resolved, the Committee of the Whole recommend to Council to direct staff to amend the Planning Committee terms of reference to reduce the number of councillor appointments to 0. Any discussion? Councillor Bocheck, followed by Cooper, followed by Wienko.
Just wondering if in the wording that the committee is going to bring to council, that it should be reviewed either in 1 year's time or at the end of this term, because the policies we're making now are not for us. They're for future terms of council as well too. So I'm just wondering if we should have a review in a year or review this at the end of at this term.
C.O. Gunby.
Thank you. The terms of reference state that council at any time can review the terms of reference. So you don't need to have a special request to do that. It
Okay,
typically
thank you.
comes up after a new election anyways.
Thank you.
Councillor Cooper.
Yes. Well, I see your wording. I don't concur with it. I wouldn't mind seeing a wording which said that we had a councillor from coastal Georgian Bay and a councillor from the inland lakes.
Except that we're saying 0 councillors.
So I'm saying 2.
Okay, but in other words, this may not carry if people agree with you. Councillor Wienko, followed by Councillor Jarvis.
If this resolution passes, is there a need to review the membership on the planning committee and possibly add 1 or 2 more? We only have, what, 5 people on it? I just can't remember how many people we have on it. So there might be the opportunity to add a couple of extra people to the committee. Do we know how many people are on it? I think there's only, I'm thinking 5 public and then 2 councillors.
Hang on.
When I sat on that planning committee, I believe there was 8 of us in total.
Yeah, there's 5 citizen reps and yes, 5 members of the public.
So I would suggest possibly getting a few more people on. 5 doesn't seem like a lot. So maybe you can add a couple more, either 1 or 2 more. I'd be open to that idea if we go 0.
Well, we can do that. In my report, I do mention that if council passes a resolution to remove members of council from committees, we can either leave them at the current number or we can repost for those vacancies.
Councillor Jarvis, followed by Councillor Douglas.
I will still insist we're doing ourselves a disservice if we don't go out and find out what other communities are doing. I think this is, I think we're being, yes, it's nice to be unique, but if unique carries terrible consequences, then that's stupid. I think we've got to find out what other people are up to. And I think it's available to us. Let's use it. So my recommendation would be either keep it the same and get more information, or I'll just say keep it the same.
You, Councillor Douglas.
Well, I think I like the resolution the way it is. Keep it to make it 0 and leave it at 5, because the more people you get on there, I mean, if you've got a good group now that are able to discuss the matters, adding 2 more people, I think, is I don't know what that's going to achieve other than just draw everything out with more and more opinions. I mean, if you feel that you've got a good group, then why change it? If the counselors aren't really putting input into this and aren't, then why would you add more people? But having said that, if we do put this resolution forward and we do end up with just the planning committee the way it is, if they feel that they need more people to help them make these decisions or whatever, maybe we can put that in the term of reference that can happen, that they themselves can request that they have a couple more members.
Okay, thank you. I think Councillor Bochek, you've already spoken to this, haven't you?
Yeah, I thought it was cows, so there wasn't
Oh,
too many rules.
Well, I
You know
I
those
didn't know whether
rules?
Councillor Hazelton wanted to turn. Councillor Hazelton, did you want to turn?
Well, I didn't have my hand up.
Oh, well,
I would like to just make a general comment, and we've talked about these things ad nauseum so far. Probably best just to take a vote, but I think that one of the things, the themes that I've been hearing from Councillor Cooper is the effectiveness of recruiting members for committees. And in my research, I discovered that there are a lot of townships that have very comprehensive documents and a fairly comprehensive process for assessing the qualifications of people to join a committee. I can offer that I didn't feel when I was assigned to the planning committee that there was any real review. I was kind of a placeholder for the Bay, which I'm not complaining about, but I just feel that we have a lot to learn from other cities and towns about what they are doing well when it comes to finding qualified people to participate on these committees. And if the strategy, as it seems to be, is to remove councillors, well, that's okay. Only if we realize that we have huge gaping holes on the other side, and we better figure out how to fill them ASAP, because I think that we're missing the boat when it comes to being effective at filling the committees with people that have gone through a rigorous process and have been given effective terms of reference. Thank you.
all right, thank you. All right. Can we have the resolution put in front of us one more time? So we have, the motion reads, be it resolved that Committee of the Whole recommend to Council to direct staff to amend the Planning Committee terms of reference to reduce the number of councillor appointments to 0. All those in favor? 1, 2, 3. I'm going to make it 4, so it carries, but I also want to remind everybody this is Committee of the Whole, so this is only a recommendation to Council, so nothing's yet cast in stone. And I think staff has heard from a number of you that a little more research into our neighbors could be very useful information for Council before they make their final decision. Our last one is Committee of Adjustment. And so I think CO Gunby.
thank you. I just wanted, before you call the question, there was a few conversations about how some council would be okay if there was only one member, provided that it was you. But as per the Planning Act, we have to reappoint a councillor every year, so it can't just be you all the time.
You can reappoint the same person year after year, can't you?
You could, but it would just be kind of hard to say that now in writing that you were going to do that.
Okay. Well, that's fine. So the question is, though, is our motion going to read 0 or is it going to read 1? Or is it going to read 2? Well, the two got the least favor. I mean, we only had 2 people who went for Well, we sort of had, anyway, how, council, do we
Can I make
want
a
to go?
comment?
You may.
Hey, really quick, I just think we got to think ahead on this. Even if we were to, if there was some way we could have you as the rep on Committee of Adjustment, we got to think of what's going to happen at next council and council beyond that. The mayor may not be the person that has a good following on both sides of the spectrum here. And that could be detrimental to the workings of the Committee of Adjustment. That's all. So that's why I think 2 members would be better.
Councillor Cooper. Followed by Councillor Bocek.
While I'd like to see 2 counselors, I would support 1, and I honestly think that at the moment we've been coincidentally very well represented by our current counselor. So if we are going to vote on something like this, which I'd prefer to do after we get more information, but I would be willing to support 1. I think 0 would be unfortunate. In effect, some of these things where we're not going to be involved, and I know people don't like the word abdication, but I see this abdication of responsibility to our constituents. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bocek.
I think one of the missing components here that we need to understand is what the chair of these committees think as well too. I know I served quite a few years on the Committee of Adjustments, and there was many times that Chair Ferguson or Chair Hill would say it's awful nice having someone here from the township to keep us in check. Now that was never true. I had never seen any incident of any councillor keeping the committee in check. Sometimes they'd ask us our opinion. So that's of value, and I didn't take that into consideration when I was, blanketly saying 0. And that's why I'm thinking it might be, before we bring this to council, a worthwhile exercise to reach out to the chair of the Committee of Adjustments and ask their feelings, what they feel the value of a council member is at the Committee of Adjustments. And that may enter into our final decision making that comes up at council. But yeah, I'll leave it at that, and I'll let my vote. If you ask a question on a resolution, I'll let my vote stand. But I really think the chair of that committee should have something to say about this too. He went into the chair's position knowing he was going to have 2 counselors there, and all of a sudden they're being ripped out from underneath him. He might not think that's the course of action this committee should take. Thoughts?
Councillor Cooper.
Same principle applies to our planning committee. Thank you. Maybe we should ask the chair, in other words.
That's fine. As I say, we're just trying to end this meeting with some ideas, and then we know that more information will be collected before this is in front of council. So why don't we make a resolution? What the heck? Let's go for 1 counselor on Committee of Adjustment and see if it carries. Be it resolved that council directs staff to amend the Committee of Adjustment terms of reference to reduce the number of councillor appointments to 1. Councillor Bocek.
And I guess it would be at council that if this resolution passed right now, then it would be up to council at that point to choose the representative of council that would be going to the Committee of Adjustments. And in that case, I would say we have 2 competent members that are currently serving on that committee, and it should be one of those 2, but that can be, again, discussed at council.
Yeah, no, I think the way I would see this is that, and I think we've had some very good discussion this afternoon, that this would go in front of council next month. Hopefully council can come to a conclusion. And if the conclusion is to change the terms of reference of any of our committees, then council has to respond to those changes to either elect or select a particular councillor or two, depending upon where we end up. Also, if we decide that we want additional members of the public on any committee by change of those terms of reference, then we'd have to agree to how going forth to somehow locate those additional members.
Mhm. Good.
Okay, so what's in front of us? All those in favor of Committee of Adjustment with one councillor? 1, 2, 3, reluctantly 4. Okay, and me at 5. Let's say that carries for now. I know that we haven't come to complete conclusions here, but I think it's important that we at least, we've taken the conversation, I think, about as far as we can today. I know there's been interest in collecting some more information, which I'm sure will be collected over the next few weeks, so that when we meet as council, we can vote with, shall we say, a little more confidence, each of us, in what we think is best for our township. But thank you very much for this discussion. Is there any new business that should be brought to the Committee of the Whole? I have it then. Moved by Councillor Jarvis, seconded by Councillor Wienko. Be it resolved, the Committee of the Whole does now adjourn at 3:55 p.m. until Tuesday, March 9th, 2021 at 1 p.m. or the call of the chair. All those in favor? All right.